Chapter 5. The Crow, the Jew, and the blue-eyed Nazi nurse. Though most days thereafter were hellish, every once in a while, for a brief day or two, there was some real magic out there on those roads. Some flashing moments of beauty, some poignant, serendipitous instances where timing, luck, and being in the right place at the right time meant everything. Moments you could only see from the driver's seat of those rigs, all alone, off somewhere in the out and about. I got hired to deliver a load of newspapers to a distribution center in Santa Barbara. I started out in the middle of the night, around 2 a.m. I had to pick up my load at a Los Angeles Times printing plant in the valley. That's when I learned to drive a forklift for the first time. You had to load bins full of that morning's newspapers onto the trailers yourself, and then unload them once you arrived at the distribution center. I got the hang of it pretty quickly, loading one bin after another, until the whole trailer was full of hot-off-the-press newspapers, full of all the news that's fit to print. Car wrecks, fires, murders, celebrity gossip, government scandals, war, inflation, adverts, recipes, obituaries, and classifieds. I was the bearer of all the bad news. I drove up the Ventura Freeway, climbing a steep grade, passing through the Conejo scales above Camarillo, then dropping down into Ventura County, looking down on the rows of corn and onion fields, wet with morning dew, the lights of the cities below, all visible from up there on the hill. Most people still asleep, dreading their alarm clocks that were ready to sound in a few short hours. It was late spring and the air was warm and sweet with the smell of wildflowers. I got to the distribution center at 4:30. I backed into the loading dock, found a forklift, and started unloading. There were workers inside, sitting at tables where they folded and wrapped rubber bands around each paper and loaded them onto small vans that then dropped them off at their final destinations, at 7-Elevens, newsstands, and drugstores around the city. They all looked very impatient and frustrated with me as I loaded in the first bins, as though they had been waiting on me and that I was late, which may have been true, as I got a little lost on my way there. They all had a look of being stuck in a dead-end and monotonous job, with no chance of advancement or prosperity. Drug addicts, ex-cons, illegals, and the elderly. They all toiled away, grabbing stacks of paper out of the bins, folding and tossing them into piles, while others loaded them onto the vans. One worker, an obvious gang member, ex-con, with tattoos all over his neck and in the corner of his eyes, glared at me with a resentful look as I dropped one bin at his table. "About time. We ain't got all night, I say," he barked, slamming his first of many stacks onto the folding table for the morning. He looked strung out and sweaty, a bit peaked, emaciated. After unloading the final few bins, I took off back down south along the coast. The light was coming up. It was a soft white light. The coastal eddy layered over the sky in a damp, cool cloud cover, casting soft shadows and even visibility over everything. The gray ocean was calm and placid, lapping softly at the beaches below me, cliffside. I came upon an exit that made me smile upon reading its name, called Santa Claus Lane. It lies about 10 miles outside of Santa Barbara in the city of Carpinteria. Back in the 20s, a lima bean farmer bought a little strip of beach there and set up a Christmas-themed gift shop with a big plaster Santa Claus on top. He caught on with the community and had been there ever since, hence the exit's name. There were sleepy little surf shops, maritime-themed seafood joints, and a dry cleaner's. I parked my rig on a sandy little turnoff right next to the off-ramp, walked over to the railroad tracks that line the shore, and up on some rocks overlooking the calm and glassy water. The beach was empty and a little foggy. At the very moment I stepped up on that rock, at that very second, hundreds and hundreds of dolphins started bobbing up on the surface of the water, one after another, swimming south along the coast, just offshore. It made me gasp at the sight of it. I stood there bewildered at the timing of it. In that very instant, as if they arrived at that very moment just for me, all alone, the only one witnessing their passing. More and more came, leaping and frolicking, feeding on the small fish that swam the tide pools and rocky reefs offshore. It was magical. I laughed out loud and hooped and hollered, watching the last of them pass by on their migration south. Then, as quickly as they arrived, they were gone, and the sea fell still and silent again. Say what I might about truck driving, if I hadn't been there, out on that road, in that very instance, just drinking in the bar, sleeping the afternoon away with some broad, or smoking a joint in front of the hotel, I would not have experienced the majesty of that moment. I felt very lucky indeed. I walked down the beach a while and found a little diner with an outdoor patio, with some wooden tables and benches and a garden with pixie lights strewn overhead. I ordered a breakfast burrito and sat outside in the misty air and ate and drank coffee and watched the clouds break and felt the warm sun on my face for the first time all morning. I got back on the road, turning off the highway to cut through Moore Park, not for any reason other than wanting to take in the beautiful scenery. The sun was out and it was nice and hot. I passed little farmhouses that sat on large acres of orange groves. The hot sun made their blossoms exude a powerful, sweet aroma. I rolled down the windows and breathed it in deeply and luxuriated in the warm breeze. The smells and the sunlight evoked something very powerful in that moment, and though it was not apparent at the time, it was something, some small thing, a hearkening, an apparition, ghostly, from the dark of my mind, like the songs I wrote that started as a rhythmic twitch, a beat on a wooden desk, then melodies, then words, then song. Something that changed my life and trajectory from that point on. A name, a person, one that I had crossed paths with on many occasions during my time in the city, and had always haunted me from first blush. Lourdes. Even before the hotel, before Hollywood, before Ray or the Improv, maybe even before I was born, I was always in love with Lourdes Malum. I know that sounds mad. I don't care. Not even sure I want to explain or if I'm even capable. I just know that I was born to love her. For reasons inexplicable, void of reason or logic, I've always known her. Maybe forever. I remember the first time I saw her, though. It was at a nightclub in Hollywood called Bar Deluxe. I was there with a friend of hers that I was dating at the time. Lourdes was standing next to the stage dancing and singing along to the band. Her best friend was the lead singer. And though there were drop-dead gorgeous women at every turn, including the one I was with, I could not, would not, take my eyes off of Lourdes. She was illuminated, at least in my mind's eye, and in the sharpest focus. I was transfixed, and unable to turn my head away. She was oblivious to my existence, watching her friend perform and shaking her ass. She was frighteningly beautiful, but not in the typical sense. Not a fair maiden with soft hair and warm eyes, but a villain. Black hair, white skin, small, fierce black eyes, sculpted eyebrows, red lips, twisted, cruel grin on her face. She looked like the girlfriend of every bad guy in every old gangster film you ever saw. A gun moll, a madam, a drag strip demon, a Tura Satana. Just as likely to have a switchblade in her clutch as some lipstick. She wore stilettos a mile high, a pencil skirt of obscene dimensions, and a sheer red scarf tied around her neck. She was covered in tattoos, and this was long before it was trendy or typical to see that. To most people's eyes in those days, she looked like a sideshow freak from the 1920s. The girl I came with noticed that I was staring at her. She nudged at me and said, "What the fuck, dude?" I didn't break my gaze for a second and asked, who's that girl next to the stage? She didn't like my response, I could tell. "That's Lourdes. Why?" she asked with a sharp tone. "Oh, okay. I was just wondering. She's really pretty," I responded without thinking. She stormed out of the club, leaving me there in the splendor of Lourdes' shapely hips, small breasts, and wicked smile. I couldn't care less where my date had gone off to. Nothing much else mattered anymore. I was truly smitten. I'd see her around town after that, at shows or shopping around Melrose Avenue. Her and her crew of friends, most of which were equally stunning. They would stroll the streets and clubs, turning heads and breaking hearts, sometimes getting in catfights with jealous girls whose boyfriends were ogling them a bit too much for their liking. I'd see her in passing and she wouldn't even look my direction, much less give me a nod or say hello. Years passed before we ever even spoke, in fact. Then one night out, a mutual friend introduced us. I was actually nervous upon shaking her hand. Then I heard her speak. I shuddered at the sound of her voice. She had great diction and a deep, warm, assured tone. Very sharp, very confident, almost cocky. I'd never been in awe of a woman like that before or since. And I think she knew, even very early on in our friendship, the power she wielded over me. We got to talking, and much to my surprise, we made a fast and strong connection. I found out that she had a steady boyfriend whom she lived with, which was no shocker, but a wretched disappointment. She was a California native like me, had gone to work straight out of high school like me, was a devout music lover and counterculture fiend like me, well-read, maybe even more than Ray was, and like Ray, she was orphaned at a very young age, was passed from one relative to another, spent time in reform school, and when she was released, came to live with her grandparents when she was 15. We kept in close touch after that, ringing each other up late at night sometimes, gabbing away for hours on end. I felt as though I had met a kindred spirit, one I was destined to adore and endure great joys and hardships with for many years to come. I don't know what it was about the smell of those orange blossoms that evoked such thoughts of her while driving down that quiet country road in Moore Park, but I actually had to pull over for a while, breathe in more of that fragrant, warm air, stare out the window of my truck, and dream of her. The two of us hiding in one of those orange groves, blankets splayed out on the dirt, kissing deeply, tangled in each other's flesh, the sun warm on our backs, my cock buried inside her, the smell of our sex mingling with the orange blossoms. It was my definition of pure and unlimited joy. But it was all just a daydream, behind the wheel of that dirty old truck, a million miles away from that becoming a reality, if ever. At least life in the hotel continued to be lively and interesting. Ray and I would drag our scooters up into our rooms, lifting them step by step up 3 flights of stairs to work on them, sanding them down and painting them, or adding crash bars and extra mirrors like the mods did in England back in the 60s. We had them looking pretty slick. We would blast down the side streets late at night when there was no traffic, or buzz around beneath the skyscrapers in the banking district on Hill Street. We'd speed through the 2nd Street tunnel, grinding it out in top gear, east through Little Tokyo, and down Traction Avenue to the hotel, then go into Al's for a pint after a good night's ride. It was great fun. Our own empty little wasteland. Ray got a little chihuahua and named him Rooster. He was a sweet little guy. I was envious. I grew up in a dog-loving family and had them throughout my youth. Then one day, Ray's girlfriend at the time asked me if I wanted to adopt a stray dog she had found under the 6th Street Bridge. She found her and 2 other dogs that looked like her, possibly her mother and sister, eating garbage under the bridge. Her and her roommates already had 4 small dogs, and she couldn't take another one in. I eagerly agreed to take her. She brought her to my door one morning, a little girl Chiweenie, half dachshund, half chihuahua, reddish blonde hair, long dachshund snout, long body, short legs, and big chihuahua ears. Cute as the day is long. I figured she was one of the many strays you see in Mexican neighborhoods, which actually form small packs. Strays of all shapes and sizes that make little extended families on the streets and roam the alleyways foraging for food. I thought she must have been from over the bridge in Boyle Heights and gave her a Mexican name, Mona. She was shy with me at first, hiding under my desk, cowering. I figured she must have been abused because she looked frightened and untrusting. But in time, when she realized I was a loving and caring daddy, she became the sweetest, most loving little creature in my life. I'd come home from work and she would wiggle and leap and snort, jumping up on my bed and licking my face off. She became a fixture in the neighborhood. Everyone loved Mona. Ray was pretty handy. Being an Eagle Scout all those years and also working as a lighting technician gave him a wealth of knowledge and skills with tools and crafts. But he was also a natural-born outlaw and a menacing little devil, always down to get into some mischief. He decided he wanted to try his hand at cultivating marijuana. At the time, the weed coming up from Mexico was, for the most part, garbage. Lots of seeds and stems, brown, sprayed down with bug sprays, and not very potent. New strains were popping up in big cities all over the states that were mind-blowing, beautiful, light green, seedless, crystal-laden buds, one-hitter-quitter type stuff. Ray figured we smoked so much, maybe we'd save money by growing our own and even make a small profit selling to all the heads in the neighborhood, which were legion. I told him I didn't know the first thing about growing anything, but that I would pitch in financially and help him set up a grow room. By this time, Ray and I had the biggest rooms in the hotel. Mine was on the 3rd floor, and his was right above me on the 4th. They were L-shaped, wide-open floor plans with little cubbies in the kitchens that acted as pantries or closet space, perfect for our little project. There was only one electrical meter for the whole building and the bar, making it impossible for any cops to trace and pinpoint whom exactly was using the extra power. Plus, utilities were included in the rent, so it wasn't costing us anything to begin with. We'd hit the 24-hour Home Depot on Sunset Boulevard really late, well past midnight, and strapped bags of soil, growing trays, and other building materials onto our scooters, take them back to the hotel, and drag them upstairs while the rest of the neighbors were fast asleep. We didn't want any tongues wagging about what we were up to, so we did everything on the sneak. Ray read everything he can get his hands on about cultivation. Went to lighting houses to buy the proper halogen lights for growing, the seeds, plant food, humidifiers, and a fully automatic hydroponic watering system with a timer that watered the plants on a set schedule. He had all the know-how about that kind of thing. I just helped him lug things upstairs and pitch in what money I could spare. Before long, Ray had the grow room up and running. He made a false wall between the pantry and the kitchen that was so seamless you wouldn't even know the pantry space was there. All one had to do was push it in a bit on the bottom where the wall met the floor, and it would pop back out enough that you could get a hold underneath and pull, and it would swing up on these hinges that Ray mounted it on. It was genius. We had about 10 plants going at one time and harvested about a half a pound of really potent weed per yield. We smoked most of it ourselves, making a lot of it into hash oil and selling the rest to our friends that hung around the bar. It was just dirty fun to pull off such a thing. A little devilment to keep things interesting. Drug culture was a major part of our day-to-day, and we found out over the years living in Los Angeles, hell, living in America, that it was a big part of everyone's day-to-day in one form or another. Comparatively speaking, Ray and I were pretty lightweight. We smoked plenty of weed, did coke every once in a great while, drank our fair share, but never to excess. That was about it. When the band started to do well, and we were getting booked on a lot of tours, a couple of us would indulge in some speed. But that was mostly to fight the fatigue of the 20-hour drives and then being expected to get on stage and put on a high-energy punk rock show for thousands of slam-dancing fans. Not an easy task, let me tell you. As for the people around us at the hotel and around the neighborhood, let's just say that drugs played a lot bigger role in their lives, helping them cope, get by, make it through another day. Jake Schneider was a kid I knew from the punk rock scene. He grew up in Venice Beach on the west side. He came from an old Jewish Hollywood family who were big players in the art scene from LA's very early cultural beginnings. They were art dealers, publishers, musicians, and teachers. He rode a P200E Vespa like mine. His was brown and beige. We met at a ska show at the Alligator Lounge on the west side and became fast friends. Though Jake had come from a very comfortable background and lived in a nice neighborhood where all the neighbors were friendly and all the kids went to school and grew up together in a lovely house with parents that were still married and 2 cute little sisters, he was still a very troubled kid. His parents started him on psych meds at a very early age, and it caused him all manner of mental issues as a result. It's always been my opinion that those fucking drugs are more of a hindrance than a solution. I had been to few shows with Jake where he wasn't kicked out for fighting. He was kicked out of all the Slander shows, and I mean every single one. We'd be on stage playing, and he would be in the pit, slam dancing and getting in drunken brawls, then dragged outside by the bouncers, kicking and screaming threats. He was very frustrated, always uncomfortable in his own skin, and a self-hating Jew. He always made a point out of saying that he was only half Jewish on his father's side and technically not Jewish, as your mother had to be a Jew for you to be considered one. And God have mercy on anyone who said he might look slightly Mexican or anything other than white. He'd throw a fucking fit. Though he was a very handsome and charismatic kid, he always had trouble with women. They would flock to him at first blush, be charmed by his quick wit and boyish smile. But the second he felt their mood shift, if they pulled back or if they harmlessly flirted with someone else, he would fly into a rage and would cause a big ruckus. Jake loved drugs. We did speed and lots of acid together and did a lot of drinking. He could drink most people under the table. His brain was super fast. You could tell in his speech that he had a hard time keeping up with his own thoughts. It was almost like he was autistic to some degree. For instance, he could name the genus of any animal you can think of. It even rivaled Ray's knowledge of such things, which was vast. Jake was a fast reader, an avid record collector, and knew everything about punk, ska, oi, death rock, rockabilly, psychobilly, and new wave. He dressed like an English tough, a soccer hooligan, a working-class thug. Doc Marten boots, stay-pressed Levi's, Fred Perry shirt, and a bomber jacket. He buzzed his hair down to the skull and wore mutton chops along his jawline. He would get blackout drunk whenever we tied one on. Where most of us were happy with a nice buzz or even getting rather sloshed, Jake had to get shit-hammered every time we had some booze. You could see it in his eyes when he blacked out. He wouldn't look at you as much as he would look through you with a 1,000-yard stare. He would just walk up to someone in our crowd and just start strangling them for no reason. He'd grab them around the throat and squeeze with all his might. We'd pull him off and drag him outside and hold him down until he came to his senses. Before too long, the booze wasn't enough, and he moved on past that into heroin. He was a ballsy little fucker. He moved into a small studio apartment on Beverly Boulevard in Alvarado, right near all the dope action in MacArthur Park in the Westlake District, and close to Skid Row in downtown. He was the only white person in his whole building. He'd drive down to 5th Street and Maple real late at night, already 3 sheets to the wind, drunk, and get out of his car, walk up to the black drug dealers looking like a skinhead, and lay some money on them. They would take a couple balloons out of their mouths and stick them in his mouth with their dirty fingers. He'd scurry back to his car, balloons between his cheek and gums, and speed home. Then he'd fix in his kitchen, shoot up, run into the bathroom and puke for a while. Then he'd climb in bed and scratch and nod well into the wee hours of dawn. In a short time, he was heavily addicted. But Jake's addiction was nothing when compared to Crow's. I had seen Crow around the neighborhood when I was working at Bloom's. He had a hot little Latina girlfriend named Gabriella. He would send her into the store to buy cigarettes, never coming in himself, but rather waiting by the front door, leering in, keeping a close eye on her so that no one dare flirt with her. He was a scary-looking motherfucker. Tall, lean, sinewy muscles, long veiny arms, big hands, big feet, A big, ugly hooked nose, crooked, jagged teeth, jailhouse tattoos, shaved head, and intense green eyes that exuded the glare of a cold-blooded killer. I was standing outside the store on the corner one day, and he came along. We started talking, and I offered him a cigar. We stood on the corner, cutting it up and puffing at the stogies. He turned out to be a very sweet, good-natured, and highly intelligent person. He spent most of his life in prison. He grew up in the Mid-City District, a hard and rough part of downtown, and was a veterano of one of the oldest Chicano gangs in Los Angeles. He was half Mexican and half Palestinian, hence his green eyes, a weird mix of blood. Having grown up with Mexicans my whole life, I was very familiar with Chicano culture, their vernacular, their politics, their food, their tastes and dislikes. So Crow took a liking to me right off. He, in turn, was a very well-read, diverse, and articulate man. He had lots of time to read while locked up in Folsom, Pelican Bay, San Quentin, and every other lockup in the California correctional system. He read the likes of George Orwell, J.D. Salinger, Henry Miller, and others, had a deep appreciation for punk rock, and was an incredible artist. Outstanding, actually. One day in front of the store, he took a white cloth napkin, the kind you would place in your lap at a fancy restaurant, and with a blue ballpoint pen, drew a perfect likeness of a great white shark with rippling beams of light reflecting off its skin. It looked like a photograph, it was so lifelike. I was astounded. He was such a talented and clever guy. His only issue, his bane, he was heavily and intensely addicted to heroin. Crow shot more dope than anyone still living, and his tolerance was unprecedented. He was tougher than most people in the arts district. Most of them were bohemian types, not athletic or fighters of any rank, with the exception of one person, yours truly. Crow got a taste of that fact one night up in my room. He wasn't living with anyone in particular and was just crashing on people's couches and staying with his girlfriend whenever they weren't in some kind of horrible dispute. I felt bad for the guy and invited him up to watch TV and have some food. He noticed my heavy bag sitting on the floor in the corner. It was the kind you didn't have to hang with a base you filled with water or sand to weigh it down. I had a weight bench, too. He got on the bench and started pumping the barbell off his chest. In spite of being totally strung out, he was a big, strong bastard. He'd get locked up, be forced to kick inside, would get on a good workout regiment, eat well, and come out looking like a beast. His sobriety wouldn't last long. He'd abscond and start getting high a few days out of the clink, but he'd still be sporting those big prison muscles. Then he got on my heavy bag, throwing pretty decent shots at it. He looked like he knew a thing or two about how to throw a punch. "Come over here, Christian. I'm going to show you how to box like a Mexican," he gloated. Little did he know that I was a serious competitor in the amateurs. I fought for the Fullerton Boxing Club from 8 years old to 18, and trained and fought with Mexican fighters throughout my whole youth. When I was 15, I was fighting full-grown Mexican men that were the same size as I was and beating their asses. Then I trained kids at the Hollenbeck Youth Center in East L.A. after that for a couple years. I was mastered, but I went along with it just to amuse myself. I let him take me through the motions and listened to him clumsily try to explain the dynamics of Queensberry boxing. "Okay, Christian, I'll hold the bag. Come at me, Holmes. Give me all you got." I sheepishly stepped up to the bag and threw a few half-assed jabs as if I had never done it before. Then I grounded myself and really let him have it. I blasted a fast and devastating combination. A beautiful Julio Cesar Chavez-inspired double hook to the body and to the head of the bag, blasted a double jab down the middle, and a right cross that literally knocked both the bag and Crow across the room and onto the floor. He looked utterly stunned. He got up off the floor. "Holy fuck, Christian. You hit like a fucking mule. Man, I'd never fuck with you in a street fight. You're a boxer? I guess I should have known. You have a heavy bag. But lots of people who don't know how to fight have them." He laughed. He knew I duped him, and he took to me all the more for doing so. A con man getting conned. What a laugh indeed. You see, Crow was a first-class bullshitter, always looking for a hustle, to game someone, to see what he could get out of people. But again, little did he know that I was wise to such characters, having grown up where I did, with the family I did, and the old friends who fell down that rabbit hole throughout my life so often and so much so that I was completely impervious to their bullshit. You just can't get one past me. I always give people the benefit of the doubt, but I can spot a lie coming around the corner from 100 miles away. My radar is keen and never fails me, and most times, junkies wear their lies on their sleeves without realizing it. Heroin has a way of giving you delusions of grandeur, making you think more of yourself than you should. They think themselves clever and slick, but more often than not, they're bumbling, clumsy, showing their cards, and fucking themselves. I liked Crow, and I let him try to run his games on me, but he never got over on me, and after a while he understood that he better not try anymore. It's always good to have dangerous friends in low places, so I'd give him a pass so long as he never got in my pockets and deemed himself trustworthy, or as trustworthy as a drug addict could be. And as it turned out, he often did. He was a good person inside, but the addiction had a very strong hold on him. It was just the nature of the beast. Jake was the only junkie I ever met who wasn't that way in the least. He held a job, paid his rent, had good credit, and never asked for money or anything for that matter, ever. He and Crow were two entirely different animals, but they were on the fringes of society by and large. Where it really got strange was when it was seemingly normal, highly functioning, responsible adults in above-board society that were heavily addicted drug users. That always seemed especially dark to me. I was having a number of romantic interludes around this time. Being in a band can get even the fattest, ugliest mug some pretty hot sex. And though I was getting rather chubby as I got on in years, I was still quite handsome and had a different woman in every town we toured through. But for a time, I got stuck on one and had a rather long relationship with her. Kylie Strauss was a nurse. She worked day and night, as nurses often do, and only had a couple of days a week to hang out. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage and had very little precious time in which to date, which, truth be told, was all I was willing to undertake anyway. Maybe that's why it worked out for as long as it did, 4 years in all. She was long-legged, blonde, blue eyes, large breast, and had very Germanic features. We met one night at one of our shows at a place called Linda's Doll Hut. It was a tiny little bar in Anaheim right next to Disneyland. It was a punk rock dive, walls covered in band stickers, smelling of stale beer and sweat. It had a tiny stage, but a good sound, and we used to pack the place. She came out to the van after the show under the guise of wanting to buy a t-shirt. When she handed me the cash for the shirt, she slipped her number on a little piece of paper in with the bills. I called her that very night, and we started dating soon after. She made good money and liked to spend it. As hard as she worked, she deserved to enjoy it. She was on her feet for 14 hours a day, dealing with sick and dying people. You couldn't pay me enough to deal with it. It takes a very special kind of person to be able to handle that. One of the ways she was able to, though, was that she was heavily addicted to pills. Vicodin specifically. Sometimes 20 pills a day. It gave her a sort of glazed-over and distant look in her eyes. Though completely competent and keenly present in her work, she had to disconnect in some way. I couldn't say I blame her, really. She had some hard-line ideas about race, most of which I would be repelled by. She was quite proud of her German ancestry and had no sympathy for illegal aliens, blacks with ghetto attitudes, or hippies. I sort of learned to hate all people equally, so I understood her points to some extent. I just never blamed people's quirks on their ethnic background. If anything, I think people use that as a scapegoat for their bad behavior, the way they do with their zodiac sign. Well, I'm a Scorpio, so I tend to beat my wife. You know how we Scorpios are. I hate that kind of shit. My commentary on humanity is best summed up in a brilliant quote by William S. Burroughs. Man is a bad animal. Simple as that. The other side of the coin was, she cared for all her patients with total and unwavering professionalism and compassion. regardless of their skin color. She kept her opinion of others under wraps for the most part, but I'd have to listen to her harebrained and half-baked conspiracy theories about Zog, the leftists, and how the white race was under attack. I'd listen and laugh and roll my eyes. Overall, she was a sweet and loving soul, and she loved me a lot. Considering what she dealt with on a day-to-day basis, it was amazing she had a sane marble rolling around in her head. Not so sure I would under the same duress. Anyway, the sex was stellar, and we looked good together. Somehow, we fit. But throughout that whole time I was with her, I just couldn't stop thinking about Lourdes. I guess Lourdes was my drug.